Hello there. How are you doing, everyone? Thank you for showing up for this talk about Office 365 and the small business plan specifically. The small business plan for Office 365 is sort of a unique animal, and it's a little bit different than the rest of the service offerings for Office 365. And we're going to spend the rest of this presentation discussing a little bit about not only what Office 365 is overall, but comparing the plans to some degree. There's not time to go into all of the details, but we're going to be focusing on the capabilities, the limitations, and the scenarios for the Office 365 plan where you'll know that, yes, this is a good plan for me, or no, I really should consider another plan. And then also, if there's time, we'll talk about some of the key setup issues in terms of getting Office 365 set up on a small business plan, in particular focusing on domain name validation if possible. And so the next thing that we're going to do is take a look at some of the more recent information that Microsoft has put out about Office 365 is that 90%, I've got this highlighted down here in the lower left, that 90% of the cloud new customers for Office 365 are using the small business plan, and that's a really interesting number. That's a big number, and a lot of people don't know, but I actually worked at Microsoft for several years as the Office 365 and Microsoft Online Services Partner Technical Readiness Manager. And so as a result of that, I was around when we were discussing these various plans. And whenever I first heard about this plan, I said, oh my gosh, this is going to be like a huge, big, popular plan. And Microsoft says, yes, we think it'll be popular too. But they weren't quite as enthused about it as I was. And as it turns out, the market is actually very enthusiastic in a way. And I don't mean that they weren't enthused about it. It's just that their expectation was that they wouldn't quite hit this 90% number. Now, if you think about it from Microsoft's perspective, if you were to count the number of customers that they have, you could say, yes, 90% of their customers are these small business plan customers. However, the total number of seats would be more in the enterprise space, and that's so that and that's the old 80-20 rule, where 20% of the customers are 80% of the seats, and so it's actually that the bigger customers do take up more seats. So it's absolutely true that a great number of the seats are in the enterprise plans, but the biggest number of customers are in the small business plans, if that makes sense to you. I do want to take time, of course, today to answer any questions that come up during the course of the presentation. I'm also, as you can see, there's a book coming out, which we're in the very, very last stages of doing the final images on as of today, working with Microsoft Office 365. That's going to be a really solid book on the P1 plan and covers everything, soup to nuts, from deployment to use case scenarios. And I've worked really hard to try to get this book to be as current as possible. And so I think they have some discounts available on that today. And I'm not pitching it just because I wrote it, but because it actually is the best reference on the plan that's available. In the next slide I want to show you is to talk a little bit about the basic features of the service. And this is not a complete set of listings here. It's just about what are the key things that you get. And with a P1 plan, which is they call it the P1 plan, which begs the question, is there a P2? And is at this point there's not. But the P1 plan is also called the Small Business and Professionals Plan. So if you go to look at Microsoft's site on Office365.com, and they have Small Business and Professionals, they also call that the P1 plan. So I'll be calling it the P1 plan throughout, just because it's a lot easier to say than Small Business and Professionals. And we'll talk about what that means, like how small is small, and all that will come into focus as we move along. What you do get with this plan is part of why it's exciting. You get a lot of features for $6 a month. You get Exchange Online, which comes with a 25-gigabyte mailbox. Includes spam and virus filtering on the server. You can hook up your mobile devices to it. And, of course, one of the key things that a lot of small businesses would like to have that they don't have frequently is the ability to share calendars and have free busy scheduling between their employees. Enterprises for a long time have had the ability to be able to look at the calendar for someone or a group of people, take 4 people, put them on a list and say, when are we all available to meet? Well, if you've ever tried to do that without a shared calendar resource, you know how much trouble that is. But with a shared calendar resource, it takes a task that can be email after email after email and turns it into basically no email, because you can see, oh, everybody's available at 2 o'clock. I'm going to send a meeting request to everyone, and then they will accept it or reject it, and you can track who's accepted and who hasn't. You can also schedule conference rooms or other resources like digital projectors or maybe delivery vans, anything that you have that has a scheduling, a limited resource that has a schedule associated with it. You can schedule using these meeting requests within Exchange Online, and it integrates with Outlook 2010 and Outlook 2003, Outlook 2007. I should say that Office 365 is not supported with Outlook 2003. So that's one of the limitations of the plan, and that's just not the P1 plan, that's all of Office 365. And so if you're looking at moving to Office 365 and you have 2003, you will need to consider upgrading to 2007 or 2010. So the calendars are a big deal. Mobile devices are a big deal. And, of course, you can add your own custom domain. So if you wanted to do widgets.com or, youraccountingfirm.net, whatever business you're in, you can certainly validate that domain and use that as your email domain. And a lot of small businesses allow you to do more than one. A lot of small businesses use more than one domain, and you can have multiple domains in a single business, no trouble. So you could have 5 people working at contoso.com and 5 people working at margiestravel.com, and there's no difficulty with all those users being in the same organization and being able to share the same calendars. You also get SharePoint Online, which allows you to share documents with other people, allows you to check in and check out documents, create custom lists, share contacts, share calendars. You can publish those documents to Outlook. There's so much you can do with SharePoint Online. Talking about SharePoint Online is really hard because it's hard to give a good overview about what it is. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife in that if you just call it a knife, you're being accurate, but it also has a screwdriver and a corkscrew and, a leather punch and all kinds of stuff. And so it can do lots of things, but mostly people need the knife. And so generally people need the sharing documents and collaborating. It makes that really simple and easy where you can search your documents, you can organize them, you can give them secure environments. And it also comes with a public website that you can use. I'll just call it, Microsoft calls it a basic public website, which is true. And then in addition to SharePoint Online, you get Link Online. Link Online allows you to do instant messaging and voice and video over the Link 2010 client, which comes free with the service. You can download that and install it on your desktop. This gives you the ability to do, as I said, messaging, and online meetings, similar to what we're doing now. You can actually conduct in Link Online using voice over IP, and then you can also transfer files. You can transfer URLs, but more importantly, it gives you presence. So, and by presence, I mean, a little green dot, if you've ever seen that shows you if someone's online or not. And that's very handy in an organization so that you can see if someone is available to have an instant message session with. Now, presence is not just limited to Link Online, and that's one of the nice things about Office 365. You also get presence in Outlook Web App, which is part of Exchange Online. You also get presence in SharePoint. You also get presence in Office. So you can even open Microsoft Word, for example. You can see that the document is was last edited by somebody on the backstage view. There's their name. There's a little green dot next to them. You can see they're online. Click on it and instant message them directly from within Word. It's a really well integrated system for presence throughout the entire suite of services. And that's one of those things that when you think about, if you have like 10, 20 people in your organization or more, 50, 100, 1,000, you think about, well, where am I going to get my money back on Office 365? And you think, well, we'll save money because we won't have to have, licenses for our on-premise Exchange servers, or we'll be able to consolidate 3 different branches into one organization, and we can all manage them from one, so we don't have 3 different administrative systems that are different and everybody using their own services. And all of that's true, but these little things like presence where you can say, hey, Joe, did you ship that package, and get answers instantly, and you know they're online, so it's much more effective, are those hidden values that it can save you a ton of money because you were able to instantly know right then they were online. And that's not in the formula usually. People are thinking about email or maybe even SharePoint, but Link is one of those real time savers and real values that people totally underestimate all the time. And once you've used it and you've got it in your organization, it's the kind of thing you always go, well, I don't know how I ever lived without that. One more thing about Link is that you can also communicate with anyone else who has Office 365. So you can instant message and chat and have webcasts or web videos and audio with anyone else. Now what you see here is the Office 365 home portal. And what we're going to step through in the next few slides are, once you've got Office 365, there are several web-based elements. In other words, services or applications that you access via Internet Explorer or whatever browser you prefer to interact with Office 365. Now what we're looking at here is a picture of the Office 365 administration portal. At the top you can see Home, Outlook, Team Site, and Admin. Now the Admin of course only shows if you are logged in as an admin. And then you can see links to Outlook. You can see a link to Link, and there's no administrative functions here. What we're looking at here is the end user portal. In other words, if I wasn't an admin, the only difference between this and the way the normal user would look at things would be that the admin menu item would not be shown. And you would access this link by going to portal.microsoftonline.com. And then you would log in with your username and identity, which is assigned to you by the admin. And then once you log in, this is what you would see. From here, you can access OLE, and then you can also access your SharePoint site. At the bottom here, you'll see the team site where it says, you can visit the team site, and then there are shared document links here. These Office icons are links into Office web apps. Now these links are not in the E-plan, the other plans, the enterprise plans for Office 365, as they wanted the small business plan people to be able to click these and instantly launch into an online version of Microsoft Word, and we'll talk about those in just a little bit. Another web-based interaction to users, another web-based interface to Office 365, I should say, is Outlook Web App. Outlook Web App is a web-based application that allows you to manage your mail. You can do a lot of stuff from Outlook Web App, and this can really save the day when you're traveling and you don't have Outlook available to you, because it's a very full-featured web interface for mail that interacts with all the calendars, tasks, and contacts, integrates with Outlook, so anything you see here is also in Outlook. You can see this picture of Dan Jump on this slide here, and you see the green. That's the presence that I was indicating, meaning that Dan Jump, if you're looking at this mail from him, you can see that he's online right now, and you can actually just hover over that and then right-click and say, or hover over that, and his contact card would fly out, which is a link feature, and you can instant message him about this meeting, which is showing here on the screen. So Outlook Web App is part of the feature set. very capable set of features within Outlook Web App. Another interface from the web side is SharePoint. This is the default team site that's created for you by default whenever you get your site Office 365 set up. It's super easy to get started with SharePoint Online, and you can start dragging and dropping documents into this section down here at the bottom, and then everybody in your organization can access those documents. Now, this is a very plain looking default team site. You can fully customize this. You can break out a free utility called SharePoint Designer and really go to town designing your own intranet sites. You could also add other team sites or a blog or wiki. All this stuff is built into SharePoint Online, and you can buy books on how to use this stuff, and people do. Furthermore, SharePoint Online has its own application development environment built into it so that you could even have custom applications written to run in what they call a sandbox of Office 365. We'll take a couple of moments here to answer some questions as we move along here. I can see we've got one that says, if you're using Office 365 and save a Word doc, does that get saved on the local PC or in the cloud? Let me push this to the slide area so you can see this. If in the cloud, does MS handle backup of that data? This is a great question. When you're using Office 365, when you open the Word doc and you save the Word doc, you can save it locally or you can save it into SharePoint. So you have the choice. If you open it in SharePoint, it's saved back on SharePoint if you choose to do that, or you can save it locally. So you have a choice of where it's stored. One of the nice things about Word is that whenever you open a document from SharePoint, and then you go back to open Word again, it remembers that you opened it from SharePoint, and so it's in your recent list. You can just click on that recent list, and it'll open it again from SharePoint. You will have the option, if it's set up properly, to check that document out so that other people can't edit it while you have possession of it. Is it backed up? Yes, it absolutely is backed up. There are a number of ways that this happens. First of all, you can set up versioning in SharePoint Online very easily. You can just open up the library and turn on versioning. That's in the book, how to do this, by the way. And you can, and then every single time you make a change to a document, it keeps a version. It keeps that as a history, so you have version history stored in SharePoint. Now, that's not turned on by default, but it's really easy to turn on. Even if you don't do that, if somehow you deleted the document, you can recover it from a recycle bin, and even if you deleted it from that recycle bin, it's still recoverable from another backup recycle bin. And then if you deleted it from there, you could actually call Microsoft, even though this plan doesn't come with support, and they would restore it for you in most cases. Now, let me cover that just a minute. We haven't gotten to that part, but basically one of the key features of this plan, if you want to say features, is that it does not come with the ability to call Microsoft support directly. So that's one of the trade-offs. If you have a support issue, you must use community-based support, which is on community.office365.com, which, by the way, should not be discounted. There are many paid employees at Microsoft who are paid to monitor and provide answers. And then as kind of a little secret is that if you actually do have a problem that they need to attend to, they will help you. They've been very courteous about that, although legally they are not obliged to. If you want to oblige them to, if you want to be sure that they have to respond to your support request, then you'll need to get an enterprise plan which starts at $10 a month. Another question here is how many external users who can only log in and access this SP site will the P1 plan support? Currently, I believe that is 50 users is the plan supported for external sharing. Now, what she's talking about here is that in the SharePoint Online plan, you have the opportunity to share your document library or your site with people who are not in Office 365. That means you can send an invitation to anyone who has a live ID associated account. In other words, they have to have, so Brett at Hilltech Services, for example, is my email address, and that's got a live ID associated with it. So you have to be able to authenticate via live ID. It doesn't have to be a Hotmail or a live.com address, as it used to, which it did used to have to be just a few months ago, but now it can be any live ID associated account. Once that's the case, then you can have up to 50 people log in to your SharePoint online site at no extra cost that do not belong to your Office 365 organization. There are no licensing costs associated with that. Let's see if we have any other questions here I want to quickly address. Along the same line, there appears to be a provision for 50 external users log on for customers external. How can you use these accounts and functionally what does the user? Okay, so this is addressing the same issue. This is SharePoint access. So these users, if I give someone access, basically, and it's super simple to do. All you do is just click on invite other people, and then you put their email address, and that person gets an invitation that allows them to connect to the SharePoint site that you sent the invitation from. And that user will then have access to whatever the rights are associated with that SharePoint site. It does not get them link. It does not get them exchange. It just gets them access to SharePoint. That doesn't mean you can't talk to them with a link if they have a Windows Messenger account or they are also on Office 365. But this particular feature we're talking about is an external license for SharePoint Online only. And you can control what they have access to through the use of permissions. Let's talk a little bit more about SharePoint. Here are some of the SharePoint sites that you can create, the kinds of built-in sites that you can create within SharePoint. So I could create a team site, which is the one that you just saw previously. Let me just back up a second and show you this. This is the team site, and this is just basically got a place where anyone can just make a post or add documents. And that document thing is called a document library. And then you can create very simply by just clicking on one of these icons when you go to, say, create a site, then give it a name and a URL, and it will automatically populate with some basic functions. You are free to remove or add additional functions to these as you see fit. So you can customize these sites as you like. Another part of Office 365, as I mentioned before, is Office Web Apps. With Office Web Apps, you have the opportunity to create, view, and edit documents in your browser, even though you're not using, without using Office. So, for example, what we're looking at here is is Word web app. And there's also an Excel web app and a OneNote web app and a PowerPoint web app. Those are all built in to Office 365, and you can use those with the P1 plan. You actually can only view documents in the E1 and in the E1 plan, and if you want to get up to editing documents, you have to go all the way up to the E3 plan, which is significantly higher price. I think it's in the $24 range. That also includes Office, which comes with that price. But still, the point is the P1 plan at $6 includes the ability to edit, view, and work with these Office Web App applications. Now, I want to be clear that the Office Web Apps is not like a full-blown version of Office in the cloud. It provides a reasonably good framework platform for creating Office documents. It provides a really good platform for viewing Office documents. What I mean by that is in this next slide. Office Web Apps is not really equal to Office in the cloud. In other words, they're not the same. The Office 2010 has a lot more features in Office 2007 than your Office Web Apps. Even so, you can still create some good-looking and useful documents using the user interfaces. So it is capable but not as rich. And the key point to remember here is that you can show documents that are more complex than you can create. In other words, I can create a document using using Word, and then show it in Outlook. I'm sorry, getting a little tongue-tied. you can create a document in Outlook. Let's try that again. You can create a document in Word, and then you can show it in Word Web App, and it'll look really nice, even if it has Smart Art. And let me back up a bit, and I'll show you. It even shows here comments that I've added to this document, so you can see the comments are showing in the browser. Well, that's a pretty advanced feature. However, you can't make these comments in Word Web App. They can only be shown when they're created in Microsoft Office. So the point here, once again, is that you can create documents that are much richer using the on-premise version of Office than you can create with Office Web Apps. But Office Web Apps is great for viewing documents and creating some simple documents. And actually, you can do pretty good with it. As a web-based version, it has the ribbon at the top, and you can format fonts and apply headings and styles and all kinds of stuff to it. So it's a pretty good set of features for the cloud-based version. But don't think of it as a complete substitute unless you're just doing really basic documents. If your whole thing is like contract law and all you're doing is producing basic documents and you don't need to operate with macros and built-in widgets and that kind of stuff, then this may be good for you because you're talking about basic text files. If you try to open a document that has a feature in it that you can't use very well, then you'll see this little pop-up. It might be a little hard to read, but basically this one says, hey, this document has features in it that you can't use in the web app. All right, so let's move along here and talk about the pricing on the plans. Now, the way that these plans work, now this is from Office365.com, which if you go to that will redirect you to the Microsoft web pages. And I've highlighted in these boxed areas some key points, and this is a really important discussion, so pay attention. Notice under user maximum, under the P1 plan, there's the number 50, whereas all the others have like 50,000 plus. Now, that user maximum means that you cannot have any more than 50 users on the P1 plan, and that's a hard limit. And what I mean by that is that if you called them up and said, hey, Microsoft, pretty please, can I have 51? The answer is no. And it goes a little beyond that. It also means that if you must have 51 or 61 or 71, that you have to actually buy another plan, an E1 or for E4 plan, and then offload all your information and onboard it to the new plan. And this is because these plans are being actually delivered from different platforms. So you can't just say, hey, Microsoft, I want to flip a switch, and now I want to convert my P1 to E1. You might think that would be the case. That would be intuitive because but it's not like cable TV where you just say, hey, now I want more channels, here's the money, now you've got the channels. You really have to basically go get a new cable box. And that's more along the lines of where you're at with that particular deal. So the point here is that if any point in the future you think you're going to be above 50 users, this is not the plan for you. You need to be thinking about an E plan instead. In addition to that, you'll see here under the intranet site for your team, you can have one site collection. Now, so the site that I showed you before for SharePoint is what they call a site collection. You can have one site collection. Now, in that site collection, you can have many, many sites. So site collection allows you to have many sites. So this starts a rather complex conversation about what is a site collection, which we don't have time to get into. But basically, you can still take each of those sites and customize them the way that you want to, so they have a different look and feel and different security and different features. But even so, some people would rather have different site collections because you can put like a template on them that allows you to segregate different divisions or different parts of an organization that's pretty suitable to an enterprise. There are other shortcomings, or I don't want to say shortcomings, but basically limitations of the service within SharePoint as well beyond this. I already mentioned Outlook Web App or Office Web Apps and the capabilities the P1 plan has. You can see here the dot for create and edit words in the P1 plan, but next to it in the E1 plan, which is more expensive, it says view only. So here you can see that that this P1 plan has a feature that's not that is not in a higher priced version of the service. So that's one of the reasons this is such a good value. And then also use 24/7 phone support. Notice there's no dot there. And Active Directory integration, there's no dot there, meaning that you can't use directory synchronization with your small business plan, which is a more advanced topic for those of you that may have a domain controller on premise. Let me scroll back here to some questions here and see what else we have here. One question is, can you add people at will? In other words, just one meeting with SharePoint link online for small business. Well, I'm not quite clear from the question what you mean. And you can invite anyone you want to a particular meeting, but link online meetings are different than SharePoint meetings. So you can invite, for example, just one person to a SharePoint site, but that's a completely different process than inviting someone to a link online meeting. A link online meeting would be like me sending you an invitation to a meeting like this. And you can be a completely anonymous user and attend a meeting that I deliver via link online, and there is no persistent connection between you and my Office 365 system. However, with a SharePoint site, that if I send you an invitation to share my content, that's not just a one-time share. I have to go and remove you as a user if I want you to stop being able to use it. But it is ad hoc in the sense that you can do that anytime you want to. Here's a question that's a little bit technical, but I kind of want to go there. Will Office 365 Word do OLE automation using data from the local machine to a VB.NET app running on the local machine, as in mail merge? I have actually demonstrated using a mail merge using Word with a SharePoint list in SharePoint Online. So you can actually interact with Office 365, but you can't run those in Office in Word web app. Those have to run in Word locally. So the Word web applications do not run OLE automation. If you want to set up some automation in your local Microsoft Office that can connect to SharePoint, that you can do that for sure, or anything else for that matter, but you can't host that code in Office web apps. Let's see here. I think I answered that. Do you know this is just 1 second? Has Office 365 been released? There's a question here. Has the Office 365 integration package been released for Small Business Server 2011? Yes, it has for the Essentials. Small Business Server Essentials has an Office 365 connector that you can use to connect to Office 365. I am not intimately familiar with that, although I have seen it, but it does exist, and it does some cool stuff that is unique to the Microsoft world, including password synchronization, and lets you manage your users from the Small Business Server. So for those of you that have Small Business Server Essentials, and it is only on the Essentials package, to my knowledge. Okay, so let's go back to our slide here and talk about the benefits of the P1 plan. Why do people like this plan? Because it's $6, because it has the features of Office 365, including some of the features of E2 and even E3, where you have read, write, and Office web apps. Another service I didn't mention is Access Web Services are enabled. Now, this is a more advanced topic for SharePoint, but you can take an Access Web database and basically publish it, as long as it's not like a multi-relational database, to a SharePoint site and have your access act as a front end to a SharePoint list. This gives you a lot of interesting scenarios where you can use Access to manage data on SharePoint, and then as a result of that, everyone has access to the same data. Some very creative scenarios available to that. You have month-to-month billing. You get a public website that has mobile access. plus you have external sharing of documents, and a whole lot more. These are just the features that people tend to often get excited about. Limitations of the plan include some details that are not so obvious, one of them being granular roles for Office 365 Administrator. Now what that means is that if you have one of the E-plans, I can create a user who can basically say, the user can say, the administrator can say, I just want this user to be able to manage passwords, or I just want this user to be able to have a limited scope. In other words, they're not full administrators. That's a very common scenario in larger organizations where you might have someone you delegate authority to be able to manage a particular administrative task. However, those features are not available in the P1 plan, and that sort of makes sense because you have a much smaller organization. There's another popular feature of SharePoint Online called My Sites that are not available in the P1 plan. My Sites are really designed for larger organizations to make it easy for people to put up personal information. You can imagine with a company with 10,000 employees, it may be hard to find who is actually in charge of Project X, and so, and also social items like who is a parent, who plays soccer, who's interested in chess. You can actually use My Site in a big organization like that and search. Using SharePoint Search, you can find those people and connect with them. So My Site is also a place for personal file storage as well in SharePoint Online. Very cool feature in larger organizations, not available in P1. Directory synchronization isn't available, which I mentioned before. So if you have a small business server, you can't synchronize your directory to Office 365. Generally, that's not that big a feature gap here because it's super easy to go in and create users in Office 365, and you can do it with an Excel spreadsheet even and create 250 users at a time, but because it's a small business plan, you can only do up to maximum of 50. And then, and because of that, of course, single sign-on is not available, so that you do have a unique login and password for Office 365, so that whenever you go to access to services, you need to sign in. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about that because Microsoft does not make clear what the sign-on experience is like for Office 365, and I have to say, even without single sign-on, it's a pretty good experience. The way this works is that whenever you hook up Outlook to Office 365, the very first time you generally type in your credentials, and then it remembers it. So every time you launch Outlook, you don't need to mess with it again. And so you don't have to type in your password hardly ever with Outlook. And then if you launch Link Online, which launches every time you start your computer by default, your Link 2010 client, that also logs in automatically. So Link and Outlook are automatic. But only if you need to browse to SharePoint or one of the other web properties, you do need to authenticate with your Office 365 login name and credentials. Usually that's your email address. The username and password for your P1 plan users do not expire by default, so except for administrators. That's different than the E1 plan, by the way. The E1 plan users, every 90 days their passwords expire unless you go in and change that. So you won't run into a situation for most of your users where suddenly their password expires and they can't get in. So all in all, other limitations include 50 users, hard limit. I've mentioned that before. And here's another big one. There's several other big ones on here that I want to mention. SSL is not available with SharePoint. Now what that means is whenever you connect to SharePoint Online, you do not have an encrypted connection, and this usually causes a few people in the audience to go, whoa, and rightly so. That does not mean that you don't authenticate securely. All authentications are secure, but it does mean that your documents are not transferred from your desktop to the cloud in an encrypted form. This is in the E1. In the E-plans, SSL connections are enabled to SharePoint, so that means that between you and the cloud, the transmission of your documents is encrypted, so that it's virtually impossible for anyone who cares to grab that information and take a look at it. But with the P1 plan, your documents are traveling to SharePoint Online in the clear. If that's a concern for you, then you cannot use the P1 plan. There are no ways to turn that on. Microsoft may at someday change that. I'm not sure at this point. Another thing is that you cannot buy additional SharePoint storage. You get, I believe, 10 gigabytes of storage plus 500 megabytes per user for storage. And if you need more than that, it's not available on on an as-needed basis. But you can buy additional storage for the E-plans. BlackBerry Enterprise Services is not available. BES for BlackBerries is the preferred mechanism for synchronizing calendars and information to BlackBerry devices. However, that is not available with the P1 plan. Now, this is not Microsoft's doing. This has to do with them. You can go to their site and look this up for Office 365, and you'll see that they do not make this available for the P1 plan. And another interesting distinction is that if you had an account, let's say I have an E1 account, and I want to add 2 users of what we might call just Exchange only. You can do that. There is a plan that just says Exchange Online only. Or I want to add 2 users that are in the E3 plan so that they can get Office 365, they can get Outlook and Office 2010 with the plan. You can do that. You can mix up these different types of subscriptions. However, if you have a P1 plan, you cannot do that. You can't say, I want to have an account that's got 20 users for the P1 plan, and then also I want to have 20 users that are part of the E1 plan. So you can't mix and match your services using the P1 plan. I want to talk a little bit about deployment now. Oops, I think one more slide here. All in all, though, if you consider that in general, many small businesses use a variety of services. They've got 1 from column A and 2 from column B. They've got this kind of service happening here, and they've got a backup service, and they've got an email service and a web service, and different services from different places. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It does, however, create a fairly chaotic situation if you start to look and try to characterize the world of SMB services. And a lot of people who have small businesses think, I'd really like to simplify. I've got 3 different offices, and they're all using different services, and I really wish I'd like to actually get everybody using the same set of services, or maybe they are using the same services, but you'd still like to consolidate those services. And Office 365 lets you do that, and then also brings enterprise-type features to the table so that for the first time, if you're using Pop Mail, for example, you'll have free busy capability, and you can do, it has really great integration with Microsoft Office. And if you start to look at what SharePoint and Office do together, there's a lot in there, and it's really interesting and fun stuff. Plus, the mobile integration can't be beat in terms of having your mail and your phone, plus contacts, and an alert comes through. And by the way, Link Mobile was just recently released so that you can have Link mobile sessions for instant messaging on your phone. And actually, the spam and virus filtering for Office 365 is considered really, really high quality. I know I have used a POP provider for a domain for quite a long time, several years, and when I switched to Office 365, my spam went to hardly noticeable. So the key to deploying this stuff is to basically think about, hold on just a second. There we go. Yep. The key with small business plan deployment, one of the things that has to happen when you get a plan, and let me just back up here for just a second, because you can go and get an Office 365 trial account for free. So I should say that right up front here, and that's that. If you have any questions about what's this like, just go to Office this portal.microsoftonline.com and sign up for a P1 account. It doesn't cost you anything, and you don't have to give them a credit card. You don't have to commit to changing your DNS records, and you can just log on. In a matter of like 2 minutes, you can be logging on and messing around with Office 365, at least using the web-based interfaces. And so that makes it super easy for you to explore. If you decide you want to move to Office 365, then you've got to, one of the first things you'll need to do is to move your domain to Office 365. Now, that involves a process called domain validation, and is somewhat technical by nature. And as much as I would like to say that it's not, and that you can do it without some technical help, if this isn't something that you're familiar with or you're comfortable with, you're probably going to need to read some or watch some webcasts, maybe get to a partner to help you, or someone who's familiar with DNS to help you get that set up. So because you have to know what things are, like what an MX record is, as you can see here on this slide. How can you validate your domain? You're going to have to go in and set up, go into your domain name hoster and change what they call a text record, a TXT record, and validate their domain, and that gives you the ability then to use that domain in Office 365. That's the way you prove that you own a domain in Office 365. Let's go on here. See, so the key is to validate your domain and then figure out how you're going to proceed from there. You can validate your domain. How are you going to migrate your mail? You can create users. Once you have your account, you can create your users anytime, and you can set up your SharePoint site. So you can start messing around with SharePoint, create your users, without having to have moved any mail yet. So step one, validate the domain, create your users, set up SharePoint. And then the next question is, how do you want to move your mail? There are a lot of ways to go about doing this. You can use a feature in Outlook web apps called Connected Accounts. You could go ahead and set up Office 365 and then just drag and drop mail from one folder to another in Outlook. There's also a feature called PST export. You can export from Outlook into a PST and import that into another Office 365. If you don't know what a PST is, then again, this is a situation where you need to do a little research or get a little help. Microsoft has released a new PST capture tool, which I have not tested, but it's new, and there's a link to it here. And then another, by the way, a very useful feature is migrationwiz.com. This is not a Microsoft service, but for $10, they'll migrate your mail. And so if you've got 20 users, it could easily be worth it to migrate your mail from, and that is from a variety of services. So if it's from another Exchange account or Gmail or Lotus Notes or wherever you want to move it from, they'll help move your mail to Office 365 inexpensive. And MessageOps.com also has an Office 365 PST importer. So there's lots of ways you can move mail, and I cover a lot of these in the book about how to organize, how to orient. We have a whole chapter on configuring your desktop that includes migrating your mail. And actually, it can be as simple as this drag and drop, where you have your existing mailbox, and then you have your Office 365 mailbox, and they're both in the same, what they call a profile in Outlook, so you're looking at them both when you open up Outlook, and you can just grab the mail from the inbox and drag and drop it to the Office 365 inbox, and it starts to copy. It can be that simple. But DNS, domain name services, is the most technical part of the process, and so you'll have to understand that to get that to work. And you know, it sounds scary because it's technical. It's actually fairly straightforward, but you do need to know what you're doing there, because that's what controls your mail and your website access. For the P1 plans, Microsoft actually wants to host your DNS. So if you've got your DNS provider at GoDaddy or Enum or somewhere else, Microsoft wants you to name them as the DNS hoster. Now that is probably a good thing for most P1 plan users, because if Microsoft makes changes to the way DNS should work, they will automatically update your account. For example, most recently Microsoft released Link Mobile, and in order to get Link Mobile to work, there are a couple of DNS changes that need to happen. So if you had an E plan and you wanted it to work, you had to go in and add these changes to your DNS provider because they don't require host, because Microsoft does not host DNS for the E plans. If you're on a P plan, Microsoft just added those to your account automatically, and you didn't have to do anything. It just worked. So that's one of the advantages. But there is a little bit of mindfulness in terms of paying attention to the transfer from your existing provider to Microsoft. Microsoft has a wizard that actually steps you through all this, which they have added recently. So I'm going to take a break here and go back to questions to see what we have. Let's see here. Just a quick second. There is a question here which I actually really like. It says, which says, this is off topic, and I don't actually think it is, but can you control access for people to just office hours? This is actually a feature of Active Directory. So if I have a domain controller, I can say, you can only log into, contoso.com at your desktop from 8 to 10 or 8 to 6. This is not a feature of Office 365 at the moment. And this points up that Office 365 is not a full-blown directory service as of this time. Now, from the previous version of the services, it was called Business Productivity Online Suite. And in that version, they had much fewer controls than they have now. Now we have granular controls for administrators. We have the ability to do quite a lot with, for example, mobile devices. We can kick people off if they're not the right kind of phone. You can force people to use a PIN. All those are actually part of the P1 plan. But it does not have this kind of a feature. But I would expect to see more and more of this as time goes on. Another question I want to address here is, can I be logged on from multiple devices concurrently with the same user ID? Yes, you can. You can log on, for example, to the same user account, to OLE, for example, using the same user ID from multiple devices. It's not, there aren't many great scenarios for where that's actually needed, but you can do that. Certainly it should not be used as a mechanism for not creating new users when that's what you really need. But you can have, I can be logged on to one computer to, for example, the online portal, and then in another device be on an online portal on the same ID, or I can be in OLE on one device and Outlook on another, both accessing the same mailbox, and that actually works fine. Let's see if there are any other questions here. If your organization grows, I believe I answered this question. I just want to address it again. If your organization grows, can you upgrade from the small business plan to enterprise plans with just an accounting change? The answer to that is no, and I want to be really clear about that. You cannot. You have to actually off-board all your data and then on-board to a new plan. Hopefully Microsoft is working on this. They know that that's a really terrible story, that that's not the end-user experience that they want to have. It's the one we have now, but anytime you encounter one of these situations, you go, really? Is that really what it is? Certainly Microsoft feels that pain too and is working on, making it easier for their customers as well as as well as themselves. So you can expect that there might be changes in that direction in the near future. I want to just take a look here at the sign-up process for if you were to go and sign up for Office 365. So here you would go to portal.microsoftonline.com. You would select the trial account. Actually, you wouldn't go. You wouldn't start here. You would first, because that'll just prompt you. You just go to office365.com, and then you'll be asked, which plan are you interested in? I want to try the P1 plan, and then it'll take you to this sign-up page. So you start not on this page, but at office365.com first. Then you enter your your organization, your company name, and then you can enter the new domain name. Now, what you're going to get when you do this is to check availability to make sure it's unique. This is going to issue you a onmicrosoft.com domain name. Now, the reason you get that first is because that way they can be sure to issue one that you can use right away that they know is unique. This becomes permanent and cannot be changed. Now, that doesn't mean you have to use it. You can still validate contoso.com or widgets.com and use that. But to begin with, you do use that, and it's good for logging into SharePoint, and you can actually send an email back and forth to and from it, and it works perfectly. But that's the fastest way for them to issue you a unique domain name, and then you get started. Then you finish the rest of this form and say you accept and continue. Then the next thing that happens is this deployment. You get this page that basically says, wait while we deploy stuff. And then after that, you get on to, you're prompted as an administrator to enter your region and mobile phone number. This is an important step here because if you forget your admin username, your admin password, you can recover it through this process using a mobile phone and email. If you don't set this up, you don't have that recovery ability, and you'll have to contact Microsoft to help them recover your password. So the next thing you'll do is set up your administrative password recovery. Please do set that up. That is basically the #1 support call to Microsoft. Then once you're there, you're into the administrative portal, and then you can set up your users. You can configure Outlook. And there's a lot to talk about in there. I have a whole chapter on configuring Exchange Online and Outlook for things like distribution lists and public groups and all kinds of stuff like that. Let's see if there are any other questions. If anybody has more questions, it's a good time to get them in because we're getting close to the end of the hour here. And I want to be sure that we can answer whatever questions people have. Then once you have the administrative portal, this is going to take us through to the domain validation process. We may not get through all of this, but I'm just going to click through this really quickly. Here you can see the domains, and the basic domain is cloud, in this case, cloudfest1.onmicrosoft.com, which is for a demo that I did at CloudFest recently. And so this is the basic domain. And then you're going to say, now I want to use, when you start to add a user, it'll say, do you want to use CloudFest or on Microsoft address, or do you want to use your own custom domain? And so here I've got one of my domains, which is teachitpro.com. And then it says, well, what about that? Are people already using that address? Meaning, are you using a service outside of Microsoft? And do you have a website? So it's trying to figure out what it's going to need to do. The next thing it's going to do is to ask you, is one of your DNS providers listed in this list? And these are common DNS providers, and if it is, it will then take you through a process where you confirm by adding a specifically formed TXT record. In this case, you can see here right in the middle, add this text record to the DNS host for, in this case, teachitpro.com, and then you can validate that that's there, and that's the way that the Office 365 knows that you own the domain, is because you were able to go in and prove that you actually are able to modify the DNS records for that domain. And at that point, then, you've got your domain validated, and then it'll manage getting your website taken care of and by tracking that IP address and entering that into the DNS, and then in the end, hold on, I'm going to get you to the right slide here. You'll have, it's not taking me to a slide I want to go to. Hold on just a second. Oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm clicking the wrong button. One moment. There we go. In the end, you'll see that you'll have Teach IT Pro, or your domain will be verified. And once it's verified, then you can add users, and you can then use those users and set up their Outlook accounts, and you're good to go. That's all you need to do is validate the domain, and then create the user accounts, assign them to the domain, and then that's it. let me show you the assigning to the domain. So here I'm creating a user, and now that I've got the domain validated, I just assign them to the domain. The next thing that will happen then is that you have a username and password that people can log in with. So when they log in to that home portal, there's a downloads page where they can download and install Link 2010. They run the Office 365 setup utility. They launch Outlook, type in their username and password. They will automatically discover their Office 365 account, and then you migrate your mail. All this is, again, as you can see, this is a lot to talk about. That's why I wrote a book on it, because there's a lot to talk about. So that's basically the overview in a nutshell. We're kind of out of time, and I would love to talk a lot more about it. But feel free to check the O'Reilly site frequently. Also, Office365answers.com. I also have training online for Office 365 end users at Office365training.com, as you can see from the little logo in the upper right of these slides. So if you need end user training, I have some of that available that takes you through some of these scenarios. If there are any other questions, please post them. Otherwise, I think we have to wrap up. Let me take a quick look here. There's one real quick one about editing capabilities, and you can multiple users can access, and I believe it's not Excel, but Word and maybe OneNote, a couple of them. Look up co-editing as the magic phrase, and Microsoft Office or SharePoint, co-editing and SharePoint. And so this is a feature that is not quite as robust as I would like, but it is present. So you can look that up using those phrases. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up.